Banks, loans, stocks, derivatives, trillions and trillions of dollars, all in a colossal system that we don't truly understand. The financial system of the modern world is so incredibly complex. It seems as though it must be imaginary, some type of ruse, or at least that it must one day come crumbling down. Fabulous wealth, opulence and luxury, wars, destruction, mayhem, politics, leverage, fraud, and manipulation. So much of the modern system is taken for granted. Yet whenever someone catches a glimpse behind the curtain, a glimpse at the machinery making it all happen, they either recoil, horrified by what they see, that human beings could really be like that, or they're transfixed, mesmerized. They see wealth on an order they could have never imagined, and want it for themselves. So why do we live in a world of financial juggernauts, intelligence agencies, military-industrial machines, constant wars, and ever-increasing debt? This world didn't have to happen. This world was built, but it was built over a long process of fallen dynasties, faction conflicts, civil wars, booms, busts, famines, and fortunes. The history of what made this system and how the people who dominate it came to be is long, full of intrigue and scheming, heartbreak and betrayal. If it could all be in one lifetime, then it would be like a marvelous myth, but something of this magnitude took generations to build. So where does it all come from? And who wanted it to be like this? "2 p.m. on January the 30th, 1649. England's civil war had ended in a defeat for the Royalists. This is not simply the end of a war, nor a change in government. The entire social structure of all the British Isles is about to be upended forever. King Charles Stuart is led to his death, and with him would go an entire way of life. The people of England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland would come to find their new Lord Protector in Oliver Cromwell, but he too would find something unexpected. For this isn't to be just the death of a man, nor even the death of a king. This would be the death of centuries. The medieval civilization of Britain had now truly gone, and with it would come new kings, new lords, and a whole new civilization. What was it that would be born from the king's spilled blood? It is Puritan England, and the parliamentarians have won. Following the King's 1649 death, the Parliament found itself in a difficult position of creating a new government structure. Parliament found itself at many impasses, unable to fulfill its function. For good reason, this government would become known as the Rump Parliament. Returning from a military campaign in Scotland, in 1651, Oliver Cromwell realizes the sorry state of Parliament, and contemplates that what England needs is a strong ruler. Oliver Cromwell is a very curious figure on a personal level. He held strong Protestant convictions, among those being that the Reformation had been insufficient. While being a Puritan Protestant, he seems to have very unique personal spiritual convictions as well. And in the political domain, he is firmly committed to the parliamentarian cause. During the early 1650s, he grows extremely frustrated with the Parliament, ultimately coercing them to form a temporary caretaker government. going so far as to dissolve Parliament with military force in 1653. And ultimately, after the dissolution of the Rump Parliament in December of 1653, he takes the title Lord Protector, giving him monarchic powers. Now, in this position, he found himself with many new problems that he would have to deal with. During this period, the First Anglo-Dutch War had arisen. And this is when we really start seeing the formation of Britain's trade empire. The conflict of the Anglo-Dutch War largely arose due to trade disputes and the shipping lanes, the war itself ultimately being a naval war. England was in a time of great social change, not only because of the still heavy reverberations of the Protestant Reformation, but because the economic lives of Britons were changing drastically. Since the high medieval period, there had been some form of middle class, but the emerging financial class was something quite different. And although Cromwell had come in as a revolutionary figure, with traditionalists loyal to the old system on one side of him, there were more radical revolutionaries on the other. The legacy of Cromwell's economic efforts are largely seen through an increase in taxes, an attempt to increase trade, an attempt to address the debts racked up during the Anglo-Dutch War, and principally the Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts, the first of which dates to 1651, form the basis of a mercantile trade protectorate designed to ensure English sovereignty on the sea. So while Cromwell is working to expand trade and is largely friendly to the new middle class, there's a real uncertainty with regards to the Dutch. The Dutch were Europe's most dominant financial nation. Originally willing to finance both sides of the Civil War, they had come to be clearly on the side of the parliamentarians, giving huge loans, facilitating the acquisition of weapons, and providing them weapon technology. England was increasingly a threat to Dutch trade supremacy, and they had embarked on a project of gaining influence in Britain. On the one hand, he shows a great willingness to fight with the Dutch. He wants them out of their zone of economic influence, and shows a willingness to align with its enemies. Yet there is some indication that he considered forming a closer relationship with the Dutch. And this is so notable because at this time, Amsterdam is the capital of capital. And Amsterdam finance is increasingly becoming a major financier of England and a major shareholder of its companies. Cromwell can't allow this to amass too much power, and he does stand ready to go to war with the Dutch again, but at the same time sees a possible benefit of working with them. He largely aimed to support the middle class, but knew that for the sovereignty and safety of England, he would have to make some decisions that would be very unpopular with the financial class. So here we're beginning to see an England that is being torn in two different directions. An England on the one hand looking to become wealthier, one that is very friendly to its financial class, and one that on the other knows that it must safeguard from monopolies, safeguard its lands and industry, and fears drawing too close to Amsterdam finance. This period of time can largely be seen as setting the scene, as a Britain being torn in multiple directions would become more and more of the story over the coming centuries. While Oliver Cromwell would leave an enormous impact on Britain, his son would prove to be less effective. Oliver Cromwell had recognized Britain's need for a strong leader, and upon his death, he was succeeded by his son, Richard, who proved to be far less adept and commanded very little loyalty. And by 1660, the country had come to yearn for the Stuarts back on the throne again. In May of 1660, another parliament convened. This, the Convention Parliament, determined that Charles's son, Charles II, would not only be invited back as king, but that ever since the death of his father, he had been the lawful king, and thus the Stuarts were restored to the throne. By this point, the Navigation Acts had begun to seriously impact Dutch shipping, and the Dutch had come to take the threat England posed to them quite seriously. Yet, as a gift following his restoration, envoys from Holland delivered a gift of 24 paintings to the new king. Feeling the effects of the war and the Navigation Acts, the Dutch were hoping to gain influence with the king. However, in 1665, a second Anglo-Dutch War would commence. Even after the first Anglo-Dutch War had ended in a peace, the trade disputes didn't stop. Clashes continued outside of Europe, particularly in the East Indies. At this point, the Dutch had formed the Dutch Republic, with the most substantial political power residing with Grand Pensionary Johan de Witt. De Witt believed that Charles supported the Orange Princes, Dutch princes who held enormous power and influence within the Republic. Nonetheless, he hoped that he might make Charles more of a friend. Ultimately, however, these disputes proved to be irreconcilable, particularly disputes around the Dutch East India Company, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, and the Dutch West India Company, Geallieerde West-Indische Compagnie. These trade companies had come to dominate more and more of European economics, and with it, European politics. The British too created their own, the East India Company, and Charles granted to them the right to govern their own territories, mint their own currency, command forces, form alliances, and administer their own laws. Yet despite the growing economic prowess, Charles found himself at a bit of a disadvantage. His Puritan Parliament had some strong objections to the lending of money, and as a divine right monarch, and one who oversaw the Church of England, he himself was quite limited when it came to credit. The Dutch, on the other hand, had a very active credit market, and had even established the first central bank in 1609, the Amsterdam Bank. So if Charles was going to finance his projects and wars, he would have to get creative. In the 1620s, during the reign of his father, the London Goldsmith Company had begun a practice of fractional reserve banking. This allowed the company to lend the gold they held, while maintaining only a fraction of it in their reserves. Under the assumption that not all of their customers would need their gold at once, they began to lend to lords, kings, and merchants, amassing great wealth and power as they did. Their foreign connections, particularly connections to Amsterdam, allowed them to buy foreign gold as well, which they would then sell to the Royal Mint. And faced with another war, Charles needed money. In order to raise funds, Charles would have to go to the Parliament and ask them to raise new taxes, something which the Parliament was often quite reluctant to do. When he did receive permission from the Parliament, Charles realized that he could take the promises of future tax revenue recorded on tally sticks and sell them to the London goldsmiths. They would buy the tally sticks from him at a discount to par and receive the tax revenue when it came in. Charles would receive gold up front. The goldsmiths would then either keep the tally sticks and receive the payments, or they would sell them, profiting quite well regardless. These tally sticks functioned as bearer bonds, where the holder of the stick was entitled to collect tax revenue. After doing this for some time, it was remarked of the goldsmiths' vault that they contained more wooden sticks than gold. Thus, in England, a highly active market for sovereign debt was born. And here we can see a financial system where sovereign debt is taking the place of gold and currency. As time went on, Charles came to realize that he could use this system to even further benefit. He realized that he could sell the tally sticks to the goldsmiths before Parliament had even approved new taxes, selling the right to tax revenue on taxes that hadn't yet even been approved by Parliament. And Parliament realized that they had no ability to control the king's spending. The goldsmiths made 8 to 10% returns and became an enormously powerful financial institution. Yet in 1672, yet another, a third Anglo-Dutch war erupted, and in order to finance the navy, Charles suspended some of the debt payments. And by 1674, the war had ended with the Treaty of Westminster, and suspicions of Charles's Orangist sympathies may have been true, as his niece, Mary, would marry William of Orange. The Oranges, for their part, saw the value in the emergent England, with a growing financial system that had many similarities to the one in Amsterdam. To the Dutch, gaining this influence in Britain could prove to be highly beneficial. In 1672, Prince William of Orange would become Stadtholder of Holland, Zeeland, Utrecht, Gelders, and Overijssel, and now the most powerful Dutch family would be directly tied to the English monarchy, just as Britain itself was becoming more tied to Amsterdam.